Here we go. The following Zoom session is being recorded and will appear later today on my YouTube channel, Math with Mayo. There are 2 different classes that may be observing this session. Therefore, when you participate in the Zoom meeting, if you do not wish for your picture or your name to be made public, please leave the video off and use an alias name. If you have questions during the meeting but do not wish to speak, email me at bmayo@ybcc.edu and I will respond as soon as I can. All right, today we start a new chapter and we're going to take a look at section 10.1. So let's get started. Okay, whoops, hang on here. There we go. 3 squared equals 9. -3, the quantity squared, equals 9. When we take the square root of 9, we only get the +3, which we refer to as the principal square root. However, let's say we have a situation where we have an equation involving a variable. Let's say we have the equation x squared equals 9. Can you see that x could equal 3 because you'd have 3 squared equals 9, but x could also equal -3 because you could have -3, the quantity squared, equals 9. Therefore, for the equation x squared equals 9, there are 2 solutions, x equals +3 and x equals -3. Any questions about that idea? All right. Now, in the previous chapter, we solved some equations that had radicals by squaring or cubing both sides of the equation. Now we're going to actually be taking the square root of both sides of an equation. Let's say, for instance, we have the following. X squared minus 49 equals 0. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to take this equation and write it in the form where we have a square on one side that has a variable inside. Now, it might have other things besides the variable, but it will have the variable inside equal to, I'm going to say, some number. Okay, so let's take this equation and let's put it in that form. If I take x squared minus 49 equals 0, and I add 49 to both sides of the equation, I get this. On the left side, I have a square that contains a variable, and on the right side, I have a number, a constant. What we're going to do now is we're going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 49 is 7, but as we talked about in a previous example, it could also be -7. So what we're going to do is, at this stage of the game, where we take the square root of both sides of the equation, we're going to put a plus or minus, in front of the square root of 49, which means that our answers are going to be x equals ±7. Now, if we were in a classroom and not using online material, not using WebAssign, the answers would be written like this, x equals ±7. But in WebAssign, it doesn't have a way to write the plus or minus notation. So what you do is you write the 2 answers separated by a comma. So it's going to be a -7, comma, space, +7. So this is the way in WebAssign that we'll write ±7. Any questions about that? Okay, let's take a look at some more examples. Let's say I have w squared minus 47 equals 0. So again, I'm going to isolate the term that is the variable squared. So I'm going to add 47 to both sides of the equation. So now I have a square containing a variable equal to some number. Taking the square root of both sides, I get w equals plus or minus. keep in mind 47 is not a perfect square and doesn't contain any square factors. So basically, my answer is plus or minus the square root of 47. So W equals negative the square root of 47, comma, the square root of 47, again, in WebAssign. You don't have to put a plus sign in front of the positive. Okay, but you do need a negative sign in front of the negative answer. All right. Another example. Let's say we've got U squared minus 24 equals 0. So I'm going to add 24 to both sides of the equation. U squared equals 24. So now I have a perfect square containing a variable equal to some number. I'll take the square root of both sides, include the plus or minus. So U equals plus or minus the square root of 24. However, as we learned in the previous chapter, we can simplify the square root of 24. Therefore, we will do that. So let's see, the square root of 24 would be the square root of 4 times 6, which would be 2 square roots of 6. So U equals plus or minus 2 square roots of 6. So U equals negative 2 square roots of 6, comma, 2 square roots of 6. And there are the two answers. Any questions about that example? All right. Then we shall continue. Let's say I've got this situation. The quantity x minus 1 squared equals 4. Well, on the left side of the equation, I have a perfect square that contains a variable. It also has a constant, but it does contain the variable. So now I'm going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. Don't forget there's a plus or minus on the right side. The square root of the quantity x minus 1 squared is x minus 1. And the square root of 4 is 2. So I get x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2. But yes.
Sorry. Wouldn't we have to do the what's inside of the square root first, or how does that work since you just went down to x minus 1?
Well, think back to the previous chapter. If I have a square and I'm taking the square root, don't those two sort of undo each other to where we get the base?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, if in the case we don't know whether it could be positive or negative, we might have to put absolute value bars on it and all that stuff, but we're not dealing with that at the moment, okay?
Okay.
All right. So now let's go back here. I've got to add 1 to both sides. So x is 1 plus or minus 2. Well, let's split those two up and see what we've got. If x is 1 plus 2, that would be 3. If x is 1 minus 2, that would be negative 1. So x equals negative 1, comma, and 3. You okay with how that turned out?
Yeah.
All righty. Let's see. Another example. The quantity s minus 7 squared equals 9. So once again, I have a perfect square with a variable inside equal to some number or a constant. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Don't forget that plus or minus. So s minus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 9 is 3. I'll add 7 to both sides. Let's see, let's make sure that that's seen as an s. S equals 7 plus or minus 3. So s equals 7 plus 3, which is 10. S equals 7 minus 3, which is 4. So s equals 10, comma 4. Sometimes it will tell you to write the smallest answer first, which in that case you'd write, what, 4, comma 10. It doesn't always ask that, but just be sure to read the questions in WebAssign carefully, because I've had people miss questions on a test. They had the right answers, but they didn't put them in the right order because it said to put the smallest one first or something, and they didn't do that. So just be careful with the directions. Okay, let's see here. Now, this says let f of x equal x plus 5 squared. Okay, then it says for what value or values of x is f of x equal to 3. So basically, we're going to substitute that in the place of f of x. So our equation becomes 3 equals the quantity x plus 5 squared. Now, maybe it's just me, but I prefer to have my square with the variable in it on the left side. So I'm just going to flip this whole thing around and put it over there. It's still the same equation. Any questions about doing that? And you don't have to. I just like to do that way. So now I'll take the square root of both sides. I get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 3. I'll subtract 2 from both sides. X.
Isn't it 5? X plus 5?
I've done it again. I'm so sorry. Yes, it is. I keep transferring things incorrectly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We good so far?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I've got x equals -5 plus or minus the square root of 3. Now, because the square root of 3 is a radical, I can't combine the -5 and those, so I have to leave them separate. So I'm going to have x equals -5 plus the square root of 3, comma, -5 minus the square root of 3. So those would be the two solutions. And again, thank you for correcting my mistake there. I thought I was going to go nice and slow today and not make any mistakes. What was I thinking? All right, you okay with that? All right, let's see here. Okay. This says let g of a equal 7a minus 2 the quantity squared. For what value or values of a is g of a equal to 8. Very much like the last problem, only a bit more complicated to simplify it, as we will see. So we're going to take 8 and put it in the place of g of a. So I'm going to go ahead and switch sides to start with. I'm going to get 7a minus 2, the quantity squared, equals 8. We okay how I got to there? All right. So I have my perfect square with a variable on the left and my constant on the right. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I get 7a minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 8. Now, there are several things I need to do. On the left side, I need to get a by itself. On the right side, I need to simplify the square root of 8. And I can do them in either order. I'm going to go ahead and simplify the square root of 8. So the square root of 8 would be the square root of 4 times 2. The square root of 4 is 2 on the outside, so I get 2 square roots of 2. So now this becomes 7a minus 2 equals plus or minus 2 square roots of 2. Again, any questions so far? All right. I'm going to take that situation right there and copy it onto the next page so I have a lot of room to work with because we're not done yet. So I've got 7a minus 2 equals plus or minus 2 square roots of 2. Let's make sure I copied that correctly. Okay. So now I've got to solve for a. I'm going to add 2 to both sides of the equation. So 7a equals 2 plus or minus 2 square roots of 2. Okay, so far so good. Now we're going to divide both sides by 7. So a equals 2 plus or minus 2 square roots of 2 all over 7. Now, I've got my 2 solutions, but to write them separately, I would say a equals 2 plus 2 square roots of 2 over 7, comma, 2 minus 2 square roots of 2 over 7. Oh, something else that I noticed on a previous test where a student got points marked off, I gave them the points, but the comma, they had it located down here. And so you've got to be careful. And when you're using the notation in WebAssign, the stuff that's over on the right, that you space, move things over with a right arrow or whatever, that comma should be up here. Oops, we're still in the erasure mode. The comma should be outside of that whole expression, not down in the denominator, because that confuses WebAssign. It doesn't register as a comma for the whole thing, and then it thinks all this thing is one answer. So again, just be careful with the notation. And you need to make note of these things when you're doing the homework. I'll have students ace the homework and then make mistakes on the test that they should have picked up on when they were doing the homework. So pay close attention to all of that. Okay. Let's see. I've got one more example. This is t plus 4 squared equals 16. So I've got the perfect square on the left side with the variable, a constant on the right. It's good to go. I'm going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. So I get t plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 16 is 4. I'll subtract 4 from both sides. T is negative 4 plus or minus 4. Notice the plus or minus is in front of the 4, but it's not out in front of the negative 4. So be careful of that. So t is negative 4 plus 4, which is 0. T is negative 4 minus 4, which is negative 8. So t equals 0, comma, and negative 8. All righty, well, that's all I've got for you today. It's this basic idea, so just be careful. Don't forget you need to simplify radicals if you can. For instance, way back here, like we simplified that and turned it into that kind of thing. Okay. Any questions before I stop the recording?